Nobody watching me eat candy.
Okay. Loud.
Thank
Now
you.
they are.
Okay. We'll go ahead and go to fiscal year 2021 budget workshop.
You want to move
Time
over
is
the bag or take the other
8:50
way?
p.m.
It's facing up.
It's facing the
It's
screen.
facing the TV. You want to talk about the budget with a big guy? It's facing there. You're not on the screen right now. Okay, cool.
Good evening. Okay, so we're going to talk about, this is our second workshop of the season, talking about the proposed budget regarding all other funds. So last week we talked about the general fund and we talked about the CJC, or Criminal Justice Center. So now we're going to talk about the other ones. So street maintenance sales tax funds, this current year we moved the street maintenance sales tax into its own dedicated special revenue fund in order to make it easier to track, and so that we could be accountable to the taxpayers on how those funds are going to be utilized. What we are anticipating going into FY21 is about a 30 to 40% reduction in sales tax revenues. It is 100% sales tax in that fund, so it'll be a pretty straightforward reduction right now. This is about on par with what we've seen. Continuing all the what we're trying to do is, in the last council meeting, we had an amendment that moved some of the street funds activities, street division, into the sales tax fund from the general fund. We want to continue that going into FY21. Takes a little bit of pressure off the general fund, remains eligible, which is always critical that we have the expenses remain eligible per state law. But it allows us to also just focus on the maintenance operations and the smaller projects. FY21 is going to be a bit of a transition year. We need to focus on doing the basics really well and transitioning as we get a lot of these major projects that have to have other funding sources into play. So the street yes, sir.
I'm sorry. What is the 40% amount to?
30 to 40%?
Yeah, the 40%.
Oops, come on.
Oh, you got it there.
I gotta get the right button. I apologize. It's actually, if you look here, 1.9. It's currently at about 2.4. So it's about $500,000 lost right now. 2.5. So it's pretty material. Not catastrophic per se, because it's an isolated function. Obviously, when we get to the general fund, it hurts a lot, and as you'll see, hot fund as well. So you'll see a large increase in the amount of personnel and operations moved over, and a bit of a decrease in the capital projects. In the street maintenance sales tax fund, we do not have debt service. However, we do charge that fund for services rendered by the general fund and by fleet. So that's where that transfer comes in. We do not, per state law, all of these funds will balance unless there is a specific appropriation of fund balance. We are not recommending that, with the exception of the airport fund. One thing, you'll see these are very general because we're still trying to make sure everything balances. But again, by state law, it will balance. But we do know that there will probably be a little bit of fluctuation between operations and equipment, capital projects. In the street maintenance sales tax fund, whatever we don't spend in operations and general capital outlay, which would be some of the repair that we do on specific streets, we would roll into capital projects for some of our big projects on streets. So like Plum Street was a major project. That's going to be an area we would put toward a big project. That's the differentiation between capital outlay and capital projects. Sanitation Fund is looking at the continued compliance with TCEQ permit limits. We have to maintain the 20 tons a day in type 1 and type 4. That is a strict adherence that we started in the last summer, so at the tail end of the FY19 budget, now into 2020, and we're coming in right about where we expected, which is great news. Love to be accurate. It does mean, though, that we will stay at that lower revenue level. We're continuing to see pretty strong use because we're at our max. As we begin the transfer station operations, we will increase operational costs and we will increase revenue. The intent is that we hope and plan for that to be cost neutral. We don't expect any spike in revenue. We don't expect any spike in costs. We will be constantly monitoring it to keep it cost neutral because we do not want it to become a burden back to the city. The idea is to make our lives better. The new routes with the new trucks that were approved by council a couple of meetings ago and the new bins, those will go into place probably in about 3 to 4 months. Those will improve timeliness, efficiency, and customer service. So while we don't expect them to reduce costs directly, we do expect them to improve what folks are paying for, so people see a better bang for their buck. Again, no expectation that there'll be any significant decline either in our demand, because we are tapped out, or in our revenues. As we get into conversations long term about, one is the oil fields bounce back, another activity resumes, and we get into the conversation about a new landfill, that's where the opportunity for new revenues and expansion come into play. So $2.2 million, that's pretty flat with current year. Personnel, obviously, that's existing, that's with the positions that were added in the current year. Operations, you'll see the equipment and vehicle outlay is actually lower than it has been recently, but that's because we're catching up a lot of trucks. We would hope to get one more going and continue that transition from the existing trucks that we have now to the rapid rail system. Debt service and transfers, there is lease payments that have to be made, and there is also, again, the support back to general fund and fleet fund who provide support to that fund. So all of the financial support, financial processing, administrative support, HR, IT, all of those things get supported through transfers. So again, we're looking at a 0 net impact fund balance. The actions taken by council 3 meetings ago actually strengthened this fund balance to allow us to have enough operating room should there be spikes and valleys in our revenue or in our demand. And that's really critical for these things, that especially in enterprise funds and in the general fund, you have to have that kind of reserve for operations, because you can't absorb it immediately. We don't have the ability to turn on a dime. We don't suddenly eliminate 3 routes because our revenue dropped. We still have services that need to be provided. The water and sewer utilities fund, we are, as talked about earlier, thank you very much for approving the new meters. From the deepest part of our souls, that's a huge stride forward. Having a new meter system and having true automated technology is essential, and that's going to be a big influencing factor. We won't necessarily see it in our financials, certainly for the first year or 2, but we should see a stabilization. And certainly on the cost side of things, we should also see a stabilization and a lot less stress, frankly. Implementing the new billing software upgrade, that is the Tyler Encode. That will go into play in the fall. It was approved in last year's budget. We are going gangbusters right now. Court went live yesterday. And I cannot give enough kudos to Jessica Acevedo and Martina Mendoza for taking a huge lead on that. It's a massive undertaking, and when we get into the utility billing, there'll be a lot of hands on deck to make that happen. That will help, again, stabilize revenues, stabilize the expense side, and how we're managing those customer accounts. We do expect some kind, potentially, there could be some impact on demand and revenue, especially in our outlying sales. Not anything significant. We definitely don't expect to see an increase. So recognizing it's pretty much flatline here, and we can go forward with that as a reasonable expectation. The wastewater treatment plant interim improvements should be under construction. During the year, again, we'll start to see the debt payments need to come into play into 21, but not likely much beyond that. It won't be online per se. So for just shy of $4.5 million budget, or just about $4.5 million budget, no increase in personnel. Operations, again, are a reflection of chemicals, electricity, water, all those pieces that we have. Capital is relatively minimal because the plant will be in a separate fund. So I do not have included in this the construction funds, because those are a whole nother beast. They will come to you for adoption, but they are money in, money out. It's very strictly regimented under GASB, which is our Government Accounting Standards Board. The debt service and transfers, we do see an increase in debt with the wastewater treatment plant improvements. We are also making sure that we have ironed out without a shadow of a doubt that we are reporting our debt correctly. So that number is likely to fluctuate a little bit. It will remain balanced. So what we'll see is some ebb and flow between these, but we want to ensure that any and all of us can stand on the numbers that you adopt, and that you have no qualms, questions, concerns about what's there. So that's where I'm just giving you the heads up. The numbers will float a little bit as we iron out and make sure that everything is pristine. Hot fund. We're estimating a 50% revenue reduction. We have been relatively fortunate that it has not slammed us, beyond comprehension, but it does mean that we get, particularly given the debt service for the baseball field, and the operating expenses and the compliance with state law. So we have all of these coming together at the same time, makes for a very different picture than current year. First year of operating expenses, probably about $350,000 to get the ball fields up, running, marketed, all those things that we are required to do. Now that we've issued debt to have those, we've got to generate money back into them. Debt service payments are $800,000. It's actually closer to $850,000. So again, I'm ironing out, making sure that everything is spotless on that. We keep a debt reserve of $200,000 or 200%. The reason we do that is the volatility of this fund. If your bond covenants say you have 1.25 or 1.5%, or yes, 1.5, not percent, 1.5 times your debt in reserve as a mandate, but you have a very volatile revenue source, you have to bump that up. It does affect your bond ratings. It also affects your ability to actually pay the bill. Knowing that hot funds are going to be volatile, they'll be volatile for the next year, probably 2 or 3, because we'll see lingering impacts. We have to ensure that. Otherwise, it comes 100% out of the general fund. And then you also have clawback issues. So we don't even want to go there. It's much better for all of us. We are talking about a 50% reserve for operations. Again, a volatile revenue source. We have to, in order to comply with the terms of having issued that debt and operating a ball field, have to be able to continue it. We cannot allow the reserve to drop too low, or we will not be able to operate. It will be a general fund obligation that opens up a lot of messes. So, you had asked Councilwoman Baca about the fund balances. We do not have the audited figures, but we are frighteningly close, so I'm very proud of this staff. We actually finished fixed assets today, which is unheard of to have that done before AP and AR and all those things. And again, a shout out to Nathaniel Sandoval and Deandra Matondo, because they have made just light years. The confidence level in these numbers is far beyond what I've seen, and I feel really good about that. We ended 9/30 of 18 with $10.7 million in debt for this fund. We added in 19 $10.1. Then we didn't spend a whole lot because we weren't doing a whole lot at that moment, but then we put into the fund balance $20 million. So we had a fund balance as of 2019 estimated of $20.8 million. We have the revenues coming in, and then we started spending down current year to build the ball field. So we've started construction, we're seeing expenses, we've got engineering going on. So our fund balance is anticipated to be fairly high as of the end of this fiscal year. That will drop fast. This is just based on budget. That assumes that I don't come to you and say, okay, we need to adjust our appropriation based on the actual speed of construction. That is a distinct possibility. You've already established the budget for it, but in terms of making sure we comply with state law, that our appropriations or our resolutions all match, that would be part of that conversation. The important part to look at is this ball field project remaining is about $16 million. So that's going to eat the majority of it. Then we have our debt service reserve, and then we have our operating reserve. That gives us about 50 grand. That's not a bad cushion, we'll take it, you know. It does mean though that there's not a lot of room for much of anything else. And it also means that should this behave much differently, we will have to adjust. So that's one of the aspects of this. So the hot fund, half is $1.8 million. Debt service, ball field operations, the capital outlay, and the project completions Those are where we're gonna see the most fluctuation as we get toward the end of the construction, any other contingency issues, anything else that has to be dealt with. We do have to equip the ball field and the operations, so that's why that capital outlay is a little larger. We should end up, if everything goes as hoped and anticipated, around $20,000 contribution to fund balance. Airport, we do expect to have some slowdown in activity, though we still rent hangars, which is nice because whether they fly or not, they still rent hangars. But we are also continuing to do infrastructure improvements out there, and that's related to the grant, some of the things that were adopted 1, 2, and 3 years back. So as I mentioned, the airport fund is the one area where we already know that we will be recommending a use of fund balance. They have a very strong fund balance. They were able to garner some of the oil royalties from prior years that had to, per the agreement with the feds, stay in the airport fund, which is allowing us to do more of the maintenance and cleanup and capital infrastructure out there. So we'll be recommending drawing down on that at about $125,000, again, capital and cleanup and maintenance out there. So, just a reminder, our next steps, we have hearings in June and July. You've set the maximum tax rate, thank you, excuse me, let me rephrase it. You have proposed the maximum tax rate. That does not set the rate. But so we will have hearings on July 9th and 23rd. We'll have more refined numbers each week. Each meeting will come back to you with more refined numbers. And then we would ask you to adopt the budget at August 13th. By state law, it must be adopted by August 15th. So that's the last regular meeting before that event. We do, again, as I've mentioned several times, expect it to get a little, to move a little bit. Not anything material in these funds as best we can see at this moment. So unless something changes significantly, obviously we will bring that to you immediately if we see any significant changes. Recognizing we have to be conservative in all of the funds. General fund obviously especially, but these other funds such as HOT and the street sales tax are more volatile, so we do have to be conservative with them. But we want to give as much flexibility to the organization, to the council to make decisions about services and priorities of the community. Any questions? Okay.
So as far as the HOT tax fund goes, I guess until we go into next year, we'll know what to expect for 22.
Yes, I at this moment, if you asked me to do a projection, I'd kind of go, sounds good. This is about as refined a forecast as I could give you for 2 years. I would hope, and given the way our economy tends to work, would hope by 23 definitely to have a rebound of some kind. 22, there's still a good chance, but I wouldn't.
Do we know if the hotels are, because of the COVID, are they given like some kind of leniency not to pay their taxes?
We have not done so. So there's been two types of requests that have been promoted by the hotel industry. One is waivers of property taxes, and that would require the city council to actually grant general fund dollars back to them in lieu of their taxes. So we cannot waive the tax. We can pay it on their behalf, but there has to be several findings made by the council in order to allow that, and it's simply taking away from the general fund. So other taxpayers will pay, they will not, it's an offset. For HOT taxes, the hotel occupancy tax, we cannot waive that tax. That is a tax that is paid by the person who books the room, not by the hotel. So if they were to collect that tax and not remit it to us, that would be a form of fraud. And we will not participate in that.
And there's nothing like that the state or the government has said that you could.
We're still
sure.
hopeful. So 2 major actions are in front of the federal feds right now. One is allowing some of the stimulus type funding to come back to local and state governments as offset of revenues. That has not had a lot of traction yet, but obviously as the second, the continuing waves come in, that's probably going to strengthen. And we've had many requests right now actually to approach our representatives about allowing advanced refunding of municipal debt, because that is going to be an issue for most of us in terms of how do we deal with our long-term debt structures. So I did send a letter to Corwin's office, Corwin's, I didn't say it correctly, requesting his support of that particular bill. I haven't heard yet where it's standing. That vote should come up fairly soon to push it through. Those are the two primary ones sitting out there. But there's not been anything that says, yeah, we're going to grant back to a specific industry or some kind of relief, other than the blanket ones that have been in effect. Yeah, it hurts. It definitely hurts. Again, it is, as we see things change, we will definitely bring it forward. And I had one month where I was like, hey, that's not so bad, and then I saw the next one. Well, never mind. Won't backpedal off of that estimate. At this point, I think we have to just kind of hold steady. I don't want to go too pessimistic, because that would be, wrong. But on the other hand, I certainly wouldn't feel comfortable recommending anything higher than this.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Melanie.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and call this workshop to an end. Time is 9:11 p.m.
Motion.
Oh, no, not that.
No, it's workshop.